So tell us, let's go right to that clip that we played from state media in Canada about the 4 incredibly dangerous people who are still languishing in prison.
Right, yes.
Tell us who they are.
So colloquially known as the Coutts 4, Jerry Moran, Chris Lysak, Chris Carbert, and Tony Olyanek are a group of protesters who were at the Coutts Freedom Convoy site.
Where is Coutts?
It's on the border with Alberta and Montana, sort of where Interstate 15 ends, and then take the highway north to Calgary and other points. And they were there exercising their rights to object to government policies, and due to very powerful forces, they've been caught up in railroaded really by the government and sort of used as pawns, because after the Freedom Convoy was crushed by Trudeau and the government, there was an inquest into that called the Public Order Emergency Commission, which the Justice Rouleau, in his conclusion about the question of whether or not Justin Trudeau was justified in imposing the Emergencies Act, he was, I can't remember the exact word, but he was a little bit reluctant. He was sort of like reluctantly agreed that Trudeau was within his rights. And most of that hinges on this case in Coutts, which once you investigate it, isn't much of a case at all. And so these 4 regular working class dudes who are at the protest site have now been imprisoned for almost 2 years. They were denied bail. They're kept in what's called remand because they haven't been convicted of anything. They haven't faced trial yet, so they don't get the rights afforded convicted prisoners. And so they've been subject to long stints of
solitary
confinement and denial of certain medical care. There's been some drama around that. Tony Olyanek has got problems with his guts. He was denied medication that he needed. Chris Lysak is a big, huge bear of a man. He's 6'5", has size 15 feet. They still haven't given him the proper shoes to wear while he's in jail. He's like walking around in Crocs all the time. He also has problems because he's so big he needs an extra mattress. They've treated these guys like crap.
And I'll just say, there's no media in the world I have more contempt for than the Canadian media. They literally work for the government. They are state media.
Yeah, they're financed to the hilt. In 2019, the Trudeau regime gave them $595 million to bail them out because they're losing money, in part because a lot of people know they're liars and aren't interested in what they have to sell. And there's been top-ups to that, and I think, I was looking it up, there's somewhere north of $700 million in subsidies from Justin Trudeau.
Right. So he owns the media. He uses your tax dollars to pay for flattering coverage of himself.
Right, and that's not even counting the CBC. That's a whole another $1.7 billion.
And to eliminate all coverage of his misdeeds. But I just want to get to something that we played in that clip. They were accused of taking orders from a secretive outside group, and Canadian media wouldn't tell us because it was, quote, redacted, what this group is. Has anyone ever explained who these guys were supposedly working for?
There's been some...
The Russians, I assume?
Yeah, there was one CBC reporter who accused the Freedom Convoy of taking money from Putin. Of course, that was ridiculous. One of the items there they were talking about, it was actually a Telegram group that's run by one guy who's just a random dude that espouses his opinion, and the government is claiming this one random guy with a Telegram group to be some criminal mastermind. Interestingly enough, that guy hasn't been apprehended, arrested, or charged with anything. And the media have also tried to conflate the Coutts guys with a podcaster in Canada named Jeremy Mackenzie and his meme country he created in his mind called Diagolon. And there's a social justice activist group in Canada called the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, who are also paid by Trudeau. And they claim that Diagolon are like an ethno-nationalist threat, and they're going to, they're armed to the hilt and they're going to take over the government. And investigations showed that Diagolon doesn't exist. And Jeremy Mackenzie is just a guy sitting in his house in Nova Scotia with some fans. And they tried to turn this into a thing. There was documents released showing that what the Canadian Anti-Hate Network had said was totally false, and the media hasn't discussed that at all.
So you've got at least four, I think many more, but you've got these four political prisoners rotting in prison, no bail, no trial, for 2 years. Has the Canadian media said anything about this other than to accuse them of being controlled by Putin?
So at the beginning, the media repeated these allegations from the RCMP and the Crown. The defense sought a publication ban because it was apparent immediately that the media was trying to railroad these guys. So the media, what they've done now is they're hiding behind that publication ban, but the publication ban is very specific on information to obtain and these unproven allegations by the RCMP and the Crown. You can still ask questions about the case, right? Like, why have these guys been denied bail? What are the connections, the political connections to the invocation of the Emergency Act and the resulting Public Order Emergency Commission ruling? There's all kinds of questions you can still ask about this case that are not subject to the bans, and there's been nothing.
So, do Canadians understand what's happening? Do they care, do you think?
A small number of us do, but we are not the people represented in the media.
How do Canadians get, your media blockade is North Korean. It's hard to get information in Canada. How do people get news about what's actually happening?
Well, they have to read, I've written on this case in Newsweek. They have to go to American media or other parts of the world because, there are some people in Canada trying, like, I'm Canadian, I write on Substack. There's a couple other, people who've been podcasting about.
I should say you're living in exile.
Yeah, I live in upstate New York now. That's
Yep.
correct. Yeah, I escaped the gulag.
Yep.
But yeah, so if people back home want to find out about this, there's only a small number of people discussing it, and most of them aren't in the country.
I assume that Trudeau, like all authoritarians, like Joe Biden, is making an example of the Coutts 4 to discourage future protests. That's what Biden did with January 6th. Arrest all these people. People are afraid. We haven't had mass protests about anything since January 6th because people know that the FBI will put them in prison. Do you think that's why he did that?
I think that's why he did that. And then over and above the Coutts 4 guys, there's a number of other people who are continuing to be punished. Chris Barber and Tamara Leach, who are the sort of the faces of the Ottawa Convoy, they were charged with like mischief and intimidation and counseling mischief and all these like silly, ridiculous charges. And their court cases are still ongoing. A number of people who were involved in Ottawa, like just showing up and protesting and taking part in it, making their voices heard, as you said, were also charged with mischief and various other offenses. Some of those people, they had their cases dropped or they were acquitted because there was nothing to it. And now the Crown is appealing those acquittals, and they're trying to drag regular people who've already been through their court case and had it acquitted, and they're bringing them back and charging them again. He's vindictive, man. Like, he can't not be wrong. He can't not admit that the largest peaceful protest in Canadian history was just that. It has to be something else to, like, satisfy his, like, sort of a proclivities towards totalitarianism.
Yeah, well, not even proclivities, just the totalitarianism he's imposing on the country.